Hello, I'm Shay Maradi. I'm the VP of Innovation and Experiential Technology at a company called Vital Auto in Coventry. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how the automotive industry is embracing immersive technologies. This is a version of a talk that I gave to Backstage Academy. When I think about the question of how it's being used, I think it's less about the how and more about why it's being used. What's the critical need that augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality, collectively extended realities, are being used for? Why is it that they are being currently embedded in automotive contexts, and what is it that makes them indispensable? I think that's a really good sort of question to ask, because clearly something is changing, something is shifting, and it's important to figure out why that's happening. I think the gist of it is, if you're not familiar with this particular sort of area, everything from concept design to the customer experience to education on the factory floor to technical simulation to even how you use a ride sharing service, the broader sort of mobility picture is either benefiting from 3D visualization, augmented reality, and other sort of technologies that are related in that area, such as spatial audio, or it's soon going to be changing to such a dramatic extent that it will become a very acceptable and accepted part of the process. I'm going to give you a number of very sort of concrete examples that I've come across. I had to do a little bit of research to figure out what some of the manufacturers are doing and what they're currently sort of talking about. And mostly these hit the design side, and I'm going to hopefully present some useful ways of looking at it as well. I've personally been fortunate enough to be involved in the marketing and experiential side of things as a consultant and founder. This is where I personally learned a lot of very valuable lessons about human interaction, about what makes an experience worthwhile, what makes it interesting to people. And a lot of these things, in my opinion, just get built because it's the right thing to do for a brand telling a story at a certain time. But sometimes it's just a cool application of technology, and there's very little sort of thought given to the why, and sometimes to the how as well. So it's just a slapdash sort of effort. Whereas 4 or 5 years ago, you could kind of get away with that, and in an automotive concept or context, rather, you would be able to embed an immersive technology such as VR, and it would be a nice bit of innovation theatre. Now it's just all about the practical usage, I feel. And with the state of things as they are now, those people who were toying with the idea previously and hadn't really started are now quickly making it a mature part of their proposition. So when we're staring at nascent technologies, the other thing I always bear in mind is that it's easy to kind of think that this kind of magic belongs in the now, but of course it's not. The appreciation of it runs a lot deeper, and the evolution of the technologies go a lot further back as well. You might ask yourself, why is it suddenly coming to the forefront now? Well, some of the answers are very obvious. It's clearly a better application of the technology because the technology is better as well. It's more mature, it's more accessible. There are more developers than ever before working in this area. So whereas before it was kind of lab technology, now it's consumer grade. Any content creator could use these sort of technologies brilliantly, so to speak. So I'm going to briefly touch upon another aspect, which is the human understanding of a designed object, such as a car. And in my opinion, that actually really comes first, that experiential aspect of why and how we sort of find these technologies interesting to interact with. So if we were to look through our binoculars as opposed to gaze into a crystal ball, I feel like the direction that is most salient to us and will give us a better glimpse of the future always considers the lens of human behavior and doesn't just look at the technology itself in isolation. So let's look at one of these sort of human behaviors and one of the reasons if you were to interrogate it. Back in 1948, a company called Hillman introduced, they're based in Coventry, or were based in Coventry, they introduced a very special version of one of their cars. Now, in 1948, this was the first London Motor Show at Earl's Court just after the war. And to bring it into a very human context, chocolate was rationed at that time, and yet car launches were still happening. So this particular car is quite special, really. They debuted a flagship version of the Hillman Minx Magnificent, it was called. And I'm going to turn my volume up a little bit so that you can hear this clip.
Once again, Britain's cars go on show at Earl's Court to tantalise us with their newness as we roll along in our pre-war flivvers, waiting for the day when a Jaguar might be ours. Or do we want a Triumph Mayflower for good value in a cheaper car? Here's the world's first X-ray model anyway, a Hillman Minx. You can see at a glance just what makes the wheels go round.
Now, it's quite interesting to look at that because as you saw in the clip, their ingenious little contraption or visual device is merely some black perspex and very sort of brightly illuminated sort of interiors. The human aspect here is that you're obviously seeing something that couldn't easily have been seen from the outside, and it creates an interesting spectacle. It was basically on a timer. The lights would turn on, it would show the interior of the car, show how spacious it was. And you can really distill a lot of work in this area down to this, really. So here's a better look at that. So really, by doing this, they were responding to very human experiential needs, curiosity. If you've been to a car show, really it's about finding out the latest and best designs and kind of glimpsing into some of the cars at these car shows don't even go on to get made. So it really drives at this sort of, we want to see this glimpse of the future. We also want to look inside things. We want to see the internal structure of things, and that's one way of finding out more about it. And this curiosity being fed, this human curiosity, is kind of partly why we find these sort of technologies, I think, quite salient. You're looking behind objects, inside objects, that kind of thing. And although the context here is marketing, I think it really does sort of juxtapose quite nicely to today's during Corona sort of after distancing world, where more than ever we want to find new ways to collaborate and do physical tasks that we once did in the same environment. Now, I'm being a little bit facetious here, picking out this particular image, but the designer effectively in this sort of Hyundai sort of Kia marketing image becomes the orchestra conductor, and it's a very stylized marketing image, of course, but they're trying to tell a story of how their designers use VR technologies. And there's a certain transparency and there's a certain beauty to this sort of componentized sort of view as well. And I think the bulk of the commercial value of embedding XR in automotive context is really in the pre-roll stuff. You might think it's the marketing stuff, and it might be, but I haven't found an adequate sort of enough measure of figuring out that the AR technology or VR technology that is being used in marketing is actually affecting the bottom line so dramatically that it couldn't have had that sort of impact during. I mean, this is just a position that I'm putting forward, but it's important to maybe cover both of those bases. And there's also another sort of gap in between that isn't currently being catered for that I'd like to kind of maybe pose and give an opinion on. So if we were to expand this sort of opportunity from getting a car from a sketch to on the road, this entire process can take several months to years. And one of the things I keep coming across in these sort of case studies is that things are happening a lot faster. Now, here's that bit of sort of opinion about this. So if things are happening faster, what's filling those gaps that previously existed? Is something coming to market faster, or are there more iterations taking place there? And I think that's something to kind of bear in mind. So if you can shortcut or condense or enrich any of those bits, is the saving getting passed on to the consumer, or are you actually doing more within that? Are we arriving at better products as a result of it? So just to come back to the few uses on the design side that I wanted to sort of talk about. So one of the oldest car manufacturers, they have something like 190,000 employees around the globe involved in various functions. I was looking at what they would be doing with VR, and they talk about sketching cars using off-the-shelf VR technology. And here is a kind of a brief sort of clip that shows that. This is a really big deal, because whether or not you believe they're using it on the concept phase, suddenly you're in the realm of democratizing that design process and opening up, actually showing what that process looks like. Whereas previously it was all 2D, it was a bit kind of esoteric, it was all flat. Now you can look at it from all angles, and it's even less mystical almost. And people are shortening those sort of loops by skipping or augmenting the 2D part altogether. You can take a high fidelity, real-time sort of digital model from the onset. You can use those very same sketches to create 3D models that then get made. And at the onset, you can involve key decision makers. So effectively, less physical things are getting made, but more people are involved in looking at properties before, and they can spot issues earlier too and feed back into the design and design evaluation process. So this is quite interesting. The other sort of subtext, as I've mentioned, is the fact that they're using off-the-shelf consumer technology products for enterprise use. And in Ford's use case, they are actually using something called Gravity Sketch, which is a very sort of inexpensive app that you can buy and use with your Oculus headset or HTC Vive or any other sort of headset that supports the application. So you don't need to spend a couple of $100,000 in your currency to use this particular technology. You don't have to pay a specific sort of annual license or anything like that. And so at Vital, I've personally seen and been involved in design reviews where we use VR. It's not a novelty, we really do use it. And just to take a step further back in the chain to see where VR is again being used in the design stage, it's worth bearing in mind that obviously we're in the fourth sort of industrial revolution right now. The ongoing automation of traditional manufacturing almost necessitates that we do things precisely and collaboratively with machines sometimes. And BMW are using it to design their production facilities. Now, this is quite an interesting development, where you can very quickly bring in the people who will be using those sort of facilities to help design them and to understand and visualize constraints before they happen. So it doesn't just get given to a plant manager or to an architect to kind of just design in a closed box fashion. They design and then they sort of iterate, and they can show people very directly, and they can spot issues obviously very quickly. So another curious thing to bear in mind is that it's no longer just sort of a human sort of endeavor or enterprise. Humans and robots are working together at a very interesting kind of ratio. I looked at SEAT. They're an example of a smaller company within a larger group. They have something like 12,000 employees and 2,000 robots. So that's a ratio of 1:6. So for every 6 people, there is a robot at SEAT. It's a staggering figure. Obviously they're not all using the robots, but you kind of get that ratio is kind of eliminating much of the kind of human involvement, but also means that humans are still controlling a lot of the aspects that robots simply can't do, otherwise they'd just be robots. They're using VR in virtual prototyping. That's what they say they're using it for. And this is a quote directly from them. Both design and engineering teams better simulate prototypes in terms of volume and size and get a more detailed view of how all the vehicle parts are connected. Sounds very obvious, but they have a really nice case study on their site. Now, it's interesting to see that their parent company, the VW Group, 2 years ago they announced that they were going to be training their employees using VR. Now, training, if you have been involved in any sort of corporate training exercise, know that it's quite an expensive process, and how it scales consistently, or how a process scales consistently, really kind of relies on good training. So you have better training, you can produce better products faster and with less accidents and issues. Now, they go through it in quite a lot of depth, and the thing about VR training is scalability for them, really. I guess we all learn at a very different pace, and VW sees the biggest benefit of VR training when employees are exposed to as many different training experiences in as many different plant locations worldwide. And one of the things that I considered would be quite interesting is that you're able to see things from the trainees' viewpoint as well. So we've kind of covered two areas. One is that you can start to, using VR, you can start to kind of sketch things and prototype things faster. And really, together with the training, you're looking at something like 600 or so improvements before a car is built. One of the companies that absolutely epitomizes this sort of level of perfection as part of their management and production philosophy is Toyota. When they were sort of looking at reducing and optimizing some of the time that was being spent in inspection, the task of inspecting the coating on the thickness of the coating thickness on a car normally requires 2 people. And this would involve 2 employees sort of meticulously cutting out small pieces of paper, placing them on the car on specific points, and then measuring it. And it's normally, like I say, a long and tedious sort of process that can on average take an entire day to complete. This is the kind of production that is currently benefiting from a mixed reality kind of setup, and they can now do it in a couple of hours. And it really sort of underpins their sort of Kaizen philosophy. Now, I looked at some reports to figure out what this all meant in terms of improving overall sort of vehicle production capacity and efficiency. And Capgemini did a report, Augmented and Virtual Reality in Operations, and they found that organizations that have managed to use at least 5 different sort of technologies that are immersive in nature, they've derived much higher benefits. And I guess this sort of applies to automotive quite nicely as well. And we could expect similar sort of results. And by doing it at the sort of start of the journey, I think that's where the impact is most felt. So really, what we're talking about is faster and cheaper. And to reiterate my sort of earlier point, I don't think this is the only way we could sort of be looking at this sort of situation. And one of the benefits that I think is massively overlooked is the expressive angle. The new tools are definitely bringing about new ways of expressing ourselves. You can absolutely believe that VR is a good way to visualize design and engineering, for faster decision making, all of those sort of good things. But what about the concept of playing around with some of these forms? When you condense that process down, you can suddenly have time to allow the insights to percolate, and you can make more mistakes. You could potentially stumble across new ways of doing things and have discoveries during that process. And also, I think the other interesting aspect is that these new tools bring new voices into the design process from adjacent industries. I'm actually not from automotive, and I'm fairly new to the area. I didn't study transport design or even product design. I've dabbled in 3D, But I have been a producer on lots of immersive interactive experiences. And I think it's really interesting to kind of consider that someone like me wouldn't have been able to enter into this area due to its specialized nature if we didn't speak the same language in terms of the tools that we're using. So this is quite interesting. How will our sort of cars change? And I think this is the expressive angle that I'm kind of referring to. Then when you combine it to the other human factors and the growth of user experience as a field, you've got this really interesting sort of set of spheres of influence that are kind of coming into automotive. So curiosity, the whys, the what ifs, the exploration side. What does this bit do? What does it look like if we did this? So new medium, new expression. I think a lot of the technology actually enables us to respond to human needs in new ways. And who's to say that that sort of narrow slice of experiencing some aspect of the product with an experiential marketing campaign isn't going to in the future affect how we perceive the cars themselves, right? This idea of a digital double, you could have a certain kind of stock car that would effectively have a very different look depending on what lens you use to look at it. So these are some of the sort of ideas in that sort of area. They have practical implications, which means we can sort of start to see variations on products very easily. I think these ideas are exceptionally relevant right now. It really is crucial for some of these sort of brands to be able to do this. They can't make multiple versions of their cars for sampling purposes. It'd just be impractical. And it's even more important now that people aren't going into showrooms to be able to do these things. But I think they're all connected, all of these things. So while we have richer sort of design processes, we also have richer in-car experiences, and this sort of idea of utility and entertainment is becoming more and more sort of intertwined. Unreal very recently sort of announced that they're bringing more power into the HMIs, the interfaces that we use on the instrument panels and screens within our sort of interiors, and I think that's a really interesting development. Richer visuals would mean that we are able to visualize things that we didn't have before, and so our lens is getting much more advanced and developed, and there's obviously fatigue that comes with these technologies as well. The flip side of it is that it might turn some people off. Technology itself could act as a bit of a blindfold. One of my favorite sort of phrases from sayings from Marshall McLuhan is that augmentation leads to amputation. Effectively, we are dramatically changing the way and transforming the way we interact with the world around us and the environment around us. But there are lots of great ideas in the past as well that we could sort of be using. A good few years ago, I read a book by Howard Rheingold called Virtual Reality, and I still to this day go back to this book because in there were loads of ideas about projecting onto retinas, about the kind of environments that we could sort of, the richness of the environments that we would have in the future, and that future has now come to be. So it might be in different formats, but it'd be really interesting to see as we become more aware of these technologies and demand sort of increases for experiencing things with these technologies, how that's going to affect the entirety of the process of creating a car from start to finish. And I think we really have to just sort of embrace this sort of unknown and experiment with it as much as we can, because I think if anyone is thinking about sort of getting into this area, there are plenty of sort of no-code environments, things like Reality Composer that let you experiment quite quickly with any idea that you might have in relation to these sort of technologies. And we're working on a number of sort of design investigations with our clients and looking forward to do more in the new year, where we're investigating how some of these technologies could be embedded meaningfully in the experience of these digital and physical properties. So please reach out to us if there's anything that you'd like to discuss further, and if there's anything that you'd like to see from us, and hopefully we'll be able to expand on some of the projects that we're doing in the very near future. Thank you.